Perfect.
Okay, today for your ethics selection, we have ethics of care. Very different from any we've done before. First of all, this one comes to us not by Plato or Aristotle or Socrates or God with his Kant himself, but the illustrious Carol Gilligan, who is still living. So she is a contemporary. And first off, this is our first woman contribution to this discussion of ethics and morality. And when I took this class in my master's program at San Diego State, she was not included in the anthology of ethical theories and systems. But in subsequent years, when they came out with new editions, she showed up. And I must admit, at first, I was a bit put out, and I probably still have some male bias, gender bias in there, which is horrible. I'm working on it. I'm trying to evolve in that sense. But I'm thinking, good Lord, we've got these bickies of Western philosophy, and you notice there are not a lot of women amongst them. And there could be a variety of reasons for that, but that simply has not been the Western tradition. And now we have Carol showing up, but after I read her contribution, I think she so deserves to be in here. She needs to be in here, and she has added so much to this discussion. And I don't really look at it even as an ethical theory in its own right, but almost a corrective or a supplement to the existing theories that are already there. And the point that she's trying to make is, I believe she was doing work, I think it was at Harvard, with Koenigsberg, I have to double check his name, but this was in the ethics department, and she was helping analyze data about how gender related to ethics results. And time and time and time again, these young college males were outperforming and outscoring by a consistent and marked degree their female counterparts. And Carol intuitively knew there was a problem, because there was no way college-age males were inherently more moral or ethical than college-age females. And so she was trying to figure out what could be causing this disparity in the outcomes and the scores and the measurement of moral progress. Now, this other person she was working with thought it was because as humans move through these stages of development, women just don't reach that final stage where that moral stuff is occurring, which, speak of misogynistic or patriarchal view, that's really something. It makes women less than or other than males. And Carol's cause was quite different. She said, well, who's making these ethics tests? That's the first question, right? Well, surprise, surprise. They're all being made by men, proctored by men, evaluated by men. And she says, of course men are going to score higher because it's catering to a male-dominated virtue system, which is primarily dominated by reason. But she said, what if we change the criteria for evaluating someone's moral progress or aptitude to relationship? And so what she's suggesting is, since women participate and are expected to live in an ethical or moral manner, maybe we need to include their voice and their perspective into the conversation. Maybe they have something to add and contribute. And so what she starts to emphasize is, she says, all these previous theories we've been studying and discussing, they're all based on what we would call masculine virtues. And she is simply saying, what if we added feminine virtues into the mix? And that's a little exercise I'm going to have us do together. I'll prime the pump to get us going. And these are stereotypical and they are culturally bound. If you travel around the world, you'll find different societies have different ideas of what is masculine and feminine. Now, I've taught anthropology for over 20 years, and part of what was standard in anthropology textbooks is this idea that sex is biological. In other words, you're born with it. So you're talking about chromosomes, your genome, those sorts of things. Whereas gender is actually cultural or learned. So in other words, whether you're male or female has to do with chromosomes. Whether you're masculine or feminine has to do with how well you're living up to your cultural norms of how a male or a female is supposed to live. But see, it's not the same everywhere. There are certain cultures where men are stay at home and breastfeed the children, and women go out and are the hunters and gatherers. And I have video, if you doubt me, I'd be happy to share with you, or I can put up a link for you. But in our society, we have these certain norms and standards, which are kind of typical in like Western Europe, the United States. There's obviously variation from different countries and regions even generations, right? But we still have norms or stereotypes in our culture. So help me with this little exercise where I want you to help me kind of list some of these, what we would consider masculine or feminine virtues. Not vices, virtues. I'll prime the pump. Justice. Mercy. And we already had the one she gave with reason, emotion, or emotive. And once again, these are stereotypes. It doesn't mean men can't have these feminine qualities or women can't have masculine qualities. But as a culture at large, we tend to see certain things as more masculine or feminine. Obviously care, right? And I don't know what, maybe the masculine would be provision. It's still showing care, but it's in a very different way. Like for years, until I actually had children and stuff of my own that I was raising and were counting on me, I didn't realize how much my dad actually loved me, because he was pretty much on your classical stereotypical male side. And he didn't show a lot of physical affectionate love or verbally affectionate, but I always had a roof over my head, shoes on my feet, food in my belly. I didn't live in fear of what would happen to me or things like that. And so he did provide that level of care and protection, but my mother did it in a way that made more sense to me as a kid. She would hug us and kiss our owies and, you know, read us bedtime stories, and just that kind of gentle, enveloping, mothering, nurturing, instead of that strong holding watch, vigilance, protection. But both show love, right? Mm-hmm. It's just in very different ways. All right, give me some more.
Well, something that I've seen in society, and this could relate a lot to reason and emotion, I've seen like women are often seen as sensitive and emotional, which you have up there, and men are stable and have more control over their emotions. At least they don't want to portray that they're weak in that sense.
Well, I would say you can even simplify the patriarchal ideology is it's strong versus weak, and it's leader versus submissive.
Okay, but give me, weak doesn't really sound like a feminine virtue. What would be the virtue of that? Like being a helpmate or a support, or the other is like
Helper,
leader?
Helper and leader.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I know in our society that sounds like a hierarchy and all that, and that's part of the problem of having these discussions, right?
Well, it is.
But see, in the kingdom of heaven, it's flipped, right?
Sure.
Where the servant is the leader of all. But, so good, but I'm getting ahead of myself. would be some other American gender stereotypes? Or if you want evangelical, if you want to bring it closer to home, or
Could I say aggressive and submissive, or like
Assertive, maybe?
assertive? Sure. That's like
sure, assertive, and what would be the other?
Yielding or compromising?
Oh yeah, that's good.
Compromising, that's a good one.
So
I think that's a better way of conceptualizing like
there's a
the
lot.
strong weak thing, because yeah, the assertive versus compromising is both values.
sure, or here you could be like peacemaker,
Mhm.
and this could be maybe like defender, or you know, protector sort of thing. Interesting. There'll be some other ones. A lot of times I notice men can be very single-minded. And even though I think multitasking is a myth, I do believe women can move from tasks quicker than most men. I think everyone can only do one thing at a time, but some people can have a lot of different things in rapid succession, and where, at least for me, I just get so OCD on what I'm doing. And I think, and if I get skewed for this, that's fine, I think that's part of why you see so many men in things like philosophy, theology. Not that women certainly aren't capable, but there is a certain level of this obsessive compulsive where you can just hold onto a thought or a thread and just take it into the depths, and you're not worrying about cooking dinner and the kids' poopy diapers, and you know you've got a job later on in the day, or you're gonna work with the women's choir, and how someone handles all that, I wouldn't be able to pursue what I do with all that other stuff going on. I have to kind of move from one to the other with clean breaks.
Would a better way of saying that be like focused versus flexible, or?
Yes.
I think goes along. with
That's
compromising,
great.
too.
You often find men can be very rigid, etc. Also, we see this kind of like, not just single-minded, but like this strong sense of individuality.
Yes, and collectivism.
Right. Women seem to be much better at networking and working with a group, where men often, they just want to do it themselves. And they don't want all the other input or feedback. They have a certain way they see it and want to follow it, etc. And so basically what Carol's saying is, if you look at this generated list, all the ethical theories have been solidly landing in the masculine column. And we haven't even given like a thought or consideration to these feminine virtues. So of course, if you're asking like ethical dilemma tests, you know, like scenarios, women are going to be responding radically differently to the same scenarios if it's based on these kind of stereotypical virtues. And that's what I love about Carol's observations. I think this is beneficial for men and women in seeing that these are not biologically specific. Your chromosomes are not going to determine if you believe in justice or mercy or individualism or the collective or all those. I would say these are much more tied into personality, temperament types, your culture, cultural expectations, how you were raised, etc. And you can see how there could be confusion if you happen to be a biological male who happens to line up with more feminine virtues, or vice versa. And it could create gender dysphoria or gender identification issues. Not that there's ever been a question about your gender, it's you're not going along with the social, cultural norms that you were brought up in. That's where the tension is taking place. Any other things you want to add before we pivot? Okay, when I was reading this, I just thought, this is great, especially if you're not trying to just make this a standalone ethic. And I think Carol was very clear about that. I don't think she's saying feminine virtues are any more virtuous than masculine virtues, she's simply saying, why can't we have all of them in the discussion? And I'm just like, yes, Carol, yes. And I think she can clearly see what would happen if you just had the right-hand column for your ethics and not the left. What could be the potential downfalls? We've already seen the problem of these, right? No mercy, no second chances. I mean, if you put out Billy's eye with the accident, it doesn't matter. Justice must be done. And it's just like, ew, how about a little mercy thrown in there? A little forgiveness, a second chance. But Billy's your son. He's not just some random kid down the block. Does that change anything? Well, if you're feminine, it does.
So what was there
Anything else you want to add to this, or this is enough to make the point? I mean, you could keep going, and you could create a whole nother list of masculine and feminine vices, right? About the unpleasantness that goes with masculinity or femininity. But this is good to keep it in the virtue camp. When I was reading this through my Jesus goggles, after I tried to understand what Carol was saying and critique it and see the value, I was thinking, good Lord, this is Jesus. But Jesus bridges the masculine and the feminine. And if you look at the descriptions of Christ, of Jesus in the New Testament, he was bold, he was singular, he could stand up against everyone alone, unintimidated. He had a profound sense of justice and righteousness and propriety. He was protecting of those under his care. But he was also gentle and meek and lowly. He was nurturing, loving, peaceful, reconciliation, relational. He had both all these masculine and feminine traits. And I imagine first century Judaism was way more gender specific than our culture. Our culture has tried so hard to move towards egalitarianism, and we've come a long way even since I was a kid. But I think this model of Jesus transcends both our modern times and his first century times. And I think this is open to males and females in Christ. I just think it's absolutely fantastic. So before I pivot, because this will open up some nice other discussions I want to have with you, but we do have to hurry, is tell me some of the strengths or weaknesses of incorporating the feminine aspects into your ethical theory. This is kind of like the critique piece, an objective critique. What could be the potential problems of adding things like mercy and care and compromise and flexibility?
I can see it being difficult to reconcile the two seemingly opposing traits.
Right.
Therefore, it could slip into an ethical theory that's, say, arbitrary, for example.
Right, because a lot's going to depend on the depth of your relationship with the other. If you're using relationship instead of reason, right? Reason is this more objective criteria, and I understand none of us are truly objective, but the relational is so subjective. It embraces the subjectivity.
I think also kind of going on the subjectivity mindset of it, you can't just have this ideal that's up in the clouds. No, it becomes very tangible.
Yeah.
And so going on subjective, it's also going to be very relative to the situations.
Mm-hmm.
So having a standard of this is what I'll do, A plus B equals C, it's going to be very different in how you deal with scenarios.
Yes.
So you can't even apply a standard even ethical relativism to this mindset because it changes a lot of the dynamics.
Right. And I really don't think Carol's advocating moral relativism, but you could see how that side would be more susceptible to it than perhaps this side. Maybe not in reality, but that side lends itself more towards a subjective, interpersonal, where this is more this abstract, analytical.
And there's strengths and weaknesses to both sides.
Exactly. And if we only have the strengths of one side, that's problematic. And that's why I think this is super valuable. let me give you some scenarios from when I worked in these group homes years ago. When I was your age, I used it to pay my way through school and to eat and all that stuff. But it was a rough population. It was actually for minor aged pedophiles. And I was just thinking, wow, not sure how I'm gonna navigate this, but I realized that there are people, they all had, no one just woke up one morning and decided I'm going to do horrible things to other little kids. I mean, every single one of those young people were victimized, usually by a relative, someone they knew. Sometimes this was generational. And once I understood that, I was a lot more empathetic and realizing, maybe these guys can turn it around and get to a place where they can be healthy and safe, and others maybe not. But didn't mean I wanted them castrated or killed, but they shouldn't be free to roam around in public just because of the great harm they could do to others, and create a whole new chain of events that goes into the future. But what I noticed with the line staff at this group home I work at, it's kind of like a house jail. We didn't have bars or locks, but it was understood if you leave without permission, you're out of the program, and that means when you are picked up, you'll go into juvenile hall and into that kind of juvenile court prison system. The line staff, and this usually fell along biological sex lines and cultural gender lines, many of the male staff, I would say the majority, saw this as punitive. They were being punished for the horrible things they did, and they were going to make their time there as rough on them as possible, with the idea of to deter them from ever doing something like that again. But they were super authoritarian. It was all about the rules. Everything was black and white. It was about you do what I say, when I say, how I say it. And these male line staff would tell me, like, see how much the boys respect me? And I'm just like, I think you're confusing respect with fear. They actually fear you. They want nothing to do with you. They do what you say because they're afraid what will happen if they don't. And I try to explain to them, but these are my peers, right? I'm not their teacher, I'm not their instructor, I'm not the resident psychologist or philosopher. I was just like, I think when the pressure of your presence is gone and the fear of what will happen to them if they don't obey you, well, so is the behavior you're getting them to have. That's the problem with behavior modification techniques. Once the techniques or the carrot or the stick is gone, so is the behavior you were nurturing, if they don't make that internalized. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we would have these hippie earth mother nurturing types that are just like, oh, these are just young boys that made a mistake, and they probably were looking for love because they didn't have it, and they were confused, and we just need to love them into health and nurture them and care for them and show that they're special. And I love that approach, but then I would watch these young men just take these women for the proverbial ride, and they would manipulate them, play on their care and their compassion, and it was just horrible. And so I'm watching this as a young man saying, wow, how do you navigate? And this kind of ties into our next theory, Aristotle's golden mean, where he says you have to find this balance between excess and deficiency. And what I realize is, and we'll talk about that more next class, but how can we navigate between these different strengths without getting out of balance with either one? And I think that becomes the technique or the skill set of applying this theory, but I think it's well worth the effort. And I think you can kind of check yourself, and I'll go more into how you can do that when we go into Aristotle. But this pairs so nicely with Aristotle, but I think if you added that right column to Kant or natural law theory or divine command theory, basically that's, I would hope, what a Christian ethic is. It's divine command theory plus the love, the mercy, the grace, the forgiveness. It's not just the wrathful, vengeful, punitive deity. This is a deity who also loves, cares, suffers with. Ultimate suffers with. Well, that was easy. Let's have a quick conversation about this. What is the difference between punishment discipline.
I believe that a good way to separate the two would be punishment is for the sake of maybe deterrence, or just either for the sake of deterrence or just for the sake of justice, as in you do this, you deserve this, whereas discipline is for the sake of actually affecting change.
Excellent. You really were nice with punishment. I would not be so gentle with it. I would just say it's retribution, revenge. I like the justice spin on it, but a lot of justice, that's exactly what it is. It's retribution. And from a Christian context, there is plenty of talk about retribution and divine wrath and punishment, but I don't think you ever see that placed on the children of God. You only hear the children of God being spoke of in terms of discipline. And if you can find a counterexample, I would love to hear it, but I'm not aware of any in the scripture. Now, what the discipline and punishment look like may actually look identical, but what's different is the motive behind it. So, for example, say I needed to get to work or a meeting and one of my kids made me like a half hour late because they were having a hard time getting up, all that. Punishment would be, say later in that afternoon, they're like, hey, uncle, could you take me to my Little League game? And I'm just like, sure, when I get around to it. And I intentionally dink around and make them 30 minutes late to show them what it was like to make me 30 minutes late. That's like punishment, punitive, an eye for an eye, blow for blow, stripe for stripe. You made me late, I'm gonna make you late. Now they could certainly learn from that, but see, it's done out of payback, not because I care about them or I want them to learn time management. What discipline would look like, I might say, you know what, I will take you to your game, but you're going to bed a half hour, maybe even an hour early tonight, so maybe you won't have that same struggle tomorrow morning. Because it's really important for me to be on time, and you need to learn how to manage your time and to be where you need to be when you say you'll be there. If you don't learn that now, it's going to be a very hard life for you. That's out of love because you care for the other. You're trying to correct harmful behavior. It's not, you put me out, I'm putting you out. Another great way to tell if you're disciplining or punishing is, where is your emotive level? Are you angry? If you're angry, I can almost guarantee you're not disciplining, you're punishing. That was such a hard lesson to learn as a parent. Often I would have to put myself on timeout because I would be so upset by something one of the kids did. I realized if I tried to discipline them in that state, even with the best of intentions, it would come out as punishment. So I would have to calm myself first, and I would simply say, you know, there will be consequences following, but because of where I am right now, I can't discipline you correctly, and I do not want to punish you. I don't believe in punishment. My 11-year-old nephew was so funny. He came from a kind of rough home life, and because of that, I never wanted to corporal punish him. I'd be happy to debate the merits and downfalls of corporal physical punishment. I can see both, but with that particular situation, I thought they need to never be physically touched again like that, because it was always in punishment or, you know, abusive sort of thing. And I'll never forget one day my nephew begged me to just get out the belt or the bamboo cane and just beat him. Just punish me, Uncle, I can't take the discipline. Because I had such thorough and severe discipline. Like I would lecture him and go through these ethical theories and consequences, and I'd make him write essays and do research. And he's just like, just beat me, just please. And I get it, the beating's easy, right? It's over, you can feel mad, move on. But that discipline, it was so calculated and intentional and in depth, trying to get to the root of the problem. And I didn't always discipline. I'm sure my nieces and nephews could recount, you know, well, you punished us this time. But that was at least the ideal I was striving for. And even though I think my own father probably 97, 98% of the time probably disciplined me correctly, the ones I remember are that 2% out of anger where I was being punished because I had embarrassed him or put him out or disappointed him. And those create like these psychic scars in our souls. That's the ones we remember, and it's so tragic. You know, you can do well so much, but it's those little spikes of it being done wrongly that we often remember. So, where I want to go, time check?
2:44.
Oh, perfect. I just have found this, actually, you know what? I think I'm gonna do a whole separate talk with you guys on the gender bred person chart. And I just think it's such an important conversation to have. I'm not quite sure how I'm gonna, because I want to keep pace with the other class. But I'll just show you real quick where we're going, even though we don't have time to cover this thoroughly. Or maybe we do. I'll just go quickly. Especially if you guys can give me 5 extra minutes. Well, that's coming up. Well, that's coming up. Oh, you have to press the power button for it. You guys remember Hippocrates? Like the Hippocratic Oath?
Yes, vaguely.
He came up with this idea of like early temperament types. And he associated them with bodily fluids. Now, a lot of different cultures have had these too. It's our modern version is like the Myers-Briggs personality, and there's other ones. But I love this old school Greek stuff. And so his 4 types.
Like the same green.
Yeah. We'll start up here. Choleric,
Yes.
phlegmatic.
Sanguine and melancholy?
Yeah. Very good. Sanguine. And melancholy. Is that screen in the thing? It's
Yeah.
Okay. The bodily fluid for the choleric is blood, because like blood, it's that vital life force, that energy, that drive. These are people of action. They take charge. They get things done. But often, they do so at the expense of trampling over others. I mean, for them, the right way is their way. The phlegmatic, their bodily fluid is phlegm. And like phlegm, it's slow and steady and consistent. These people, they could have won the lottery or lost their significant other, and you may not see any effective change on them. They're that even-keeled. It's because they kind of like fly above the cares of this world. They have like the big picture approach. And so they're not following these ups and downs of life. They're just relaxed and they go with it. For them, the right way is the peaceful way. These are your natural born peacemakers. They know how to move amongst conflicts, etc. And it's interesting because different temperament types actually rub each other wrong. And these people drive these people absolutely crazy. Because these people are trying to get stuff done, they're people of action, and these people are just like, just relax, bro. It's gonna be okay. Meanwhile, the sanguine, their bodily fluid is yellow bile, which is a nice way of saying pee, because like taking a leak, once you start, you can't stop till you're done. And that's how these people are. They are like your emotional roller coaster. It's just like, woo, woo. They wear their emotions on the sleeve. They literally can be laughing 1 minute, crying 5 minutes later, and then laughing again. And for these people, that is so emotionally exhausting and taxing, it's just a workout. The next, but these people, these are like your nurturing. When they are with you, they are present. But that really bad time management, because they're so present. But they're so fun to be with. I mean, they are the life of the party. But they're also the people that always need the comfort. They always need to be reassured. Because they're so relational. And then the melancholy, you can imagine what melancholies think of these, well, and vice versa. These people probably cannot handle. That would drive them crazy, so would these people. Anyways, the melancholy, their bodily fluid is black bile, which is a nice way of saying poop. Because like poop, they can be stinky and withdrawn, and
Ouch.
but it's also, this is your artistic temperament. This is the most gifted and most troubled of all the temperament types. This is where you find your philosophers, theologians, artists, musicians, playwrights, all these sorts of things. See, the phlegmatic would produce like really good graphic designers or architects or people that are good with meticulous stuff, but this is that creative out of that, the depths, the darkness, the brooding, but they produce some of the most incredible things in the history of mankind. But then there always seems to be a price they have to pay back down into the depths. So even though it's such a gifted one, this is also where you find probably most people that are subject to homosexuality, to manic depressive disorder, multiple personality disorder, mood swings, depression. It's just amazing when you think about it. David would have had huge melancholy elements, and when you read through the Psalms, you just feel like you're on a roller coaster, right? One psalm he's exalting and praising God, and the next he's just wallowing in his tears and the depths of despair and seeking salvation. And then the next one, it's a song of all exaltation and praise, and you're just going, gee whiz, David. Almost no one is for these people the right way is the fun way, and for these people the right way is the right way. And they actually take the time to figure out what the right way is. So say you have a church meeting and you decide you need to build a new tool shed or something on the property. The choleric is going to jump in his truck, head down to the hardware store, pick up supplies, and be back ready to go. The phlegmatic is going to be like, let's draw out the plans, let's make sure we get the permits, let's do this right, let's make sure it integrates with the property, we think about the future we're going to build. So they're very good at that big picture piece. The sanguines are thinking, potluck! We can get the folks together, it can just be like a barn raising, we're just gonna make a event out of it. And the melancholies are actually thinking about the aesthetics. I mean, should it complement the main building? Should it highlight it? What kind of accentuations could we do? How is this going to be with the overall aesthetics of the property? And they're really doing this fine, meticulous. By the time these two folks figure out what should be done, these two have already had the building up, had the potluck, and are off to the next project. And so it's just so wild how we're wired. And the reason I'm bringing all this up, with this chart, I find most evangelicals cannot even have the conversation about gender issues because they're even so confused about what it means. But it's not solely their fault. I believe about 5 years ago, I'll have to double check, California actually passed a law saying gender was also biological. It wasn't learned or cultural, but you were born with gender. And I think the intention was nice. I think it was to try to protect people with gender dysphoria or people with transgender identification. Because if you could say you're born with it, you could see how easily you could give them the same protections as you're born a woman, you're born a man, you're born black, you're born Native American. I mean, how can you put something on someone that is completely outside their control? But see, if you make it a learned behavior or a choice, it leaves room for, I'm just speculating that was the noble intention. I just think it's muddied the waters even more. So what I like about this is your chromosomes, right? XX, XY. This would be like intersex, middle sex. We do have people with XXY, XXXY. They're rare, but there are people in that place. And I don't think I've talked to Christians, and when I try to explain this chart to them, they're just like, male and female, created he, them. And I'm just like, yeah, in the beginning that was so, but we're in a fallen world. Not everyone is made male or female now. There are people that are actually made male and female. And you can't just act like that doesn't exist because it's not in your precious book. This piece is how you view yourself. And so when we talk about gender dysphoria, these are people with one biological, so here a male biological member, but they identify as female or feminine. And that is what we would call gender dysphoria. And many people with this condition would identify as transgender. Not always, but sometimes they want to have this match this. And they feel it's easier to change this than this. The problem is, we're not just talking about vaginas or penises or ovaries or testes. We're talking at the cellular level. Every cell in your body carries that DNA imprint. So that's my concern of people seeking a physiological correction, when I think the identity piece is so huge and equally important. And I think most transgender people would agree with that. There's also the difference, expression here, that's how you present yourself. So if you go down to like the drag show Lips in North Park area, a lot of the men there who are dressing as women, I would say probably half of them are not attracted to other men. They still have heterosexual attractions. They just enjoy expressing this feminine, what our society would portray as feminine. So think of transvestite as vestments, what you put on. Transsexual is actually trying to change one's biology in a sense, to a degree, through hormone therapy, surgeries, etc. Now that could involve dress and presentation, but they're talking at a deeper level. And then the attraction piece is who you are actually sexually or romantically attracted to. Because you could be, well, you can just see all the combinations you could get. And I like how they have it as like a sliding scale. So you could plot yourself on how womanly or manly you identify, how you express yourself. I mean, in this room, it's pretty, I think, evident we're dressing according to our social norms of gender. I mean, we have a much more egalitarian society, but you could see some societies that it would get even more extreme. But some people might find themselves more in an androgynous place where they're not looking for a super masculine or super feminine look, just kind of almost a neutral presentation. Biological sex, I think there it would be some people actually are middle sex, and that might be a 60-40, 20-80, 50-50. I mean, there's lots of different variations. And then, of course, the sexual attraction. I like how they separated sexual and romantic attraction. I think that's super interesting. Because you might be emotively or soulfully in love with someone of the same sex, but it's kind of inconceivable to you of having physical relations with them. Or vice versa. You might be attracted physically to someone of the same or opposite sex, but you really can't get close to them in an emotional, romantic way. So interesting. The human is so complex. Why I put this up, and I really promise I'm wrapping this up, this was just good foundation for later talks. In our culture, for whatever reason, we have determined that these two temperament types, and once again, these are not biological or gender specific. You could be male or female having these traits. We've determined these are masculine and these are feminine. And once again, other cultures might have different characteristics. So if you're a young man who's assertive, take charge, or you're super chill, relax, people can't upset you, get you out of your flow, that's seen as very manly in our society. But if you're a very emotional young man, or very brooding and moody, artsy, people might have questions about your orientation or your sexuality or your masculinity. Same thing's true of women. If you're a choleric, very domineering, assertive woman, people aren't going to praise you probably for your leadership skills. They're going to call you bossy or a dyke or something offensive, right? Or if you're a female that has great control of her emotions and doesn't get all teary and weepy, you're probably going to get called an ice maiden, right? Or have a heart of stone. But if a guy does it, that's being manly or masculine. So weird. This is part of why what you will find is many women, especially in this, a lot of this gender ideation and identity stuff is happening in middle school, high school, when people are trying to sort out who they are. Well, you tend to find these choleric women or phlegmatic women often in like athletics or sports, or they're interested in careers like the military or being a lineman for the county, or things that we normally think as more masculine roles. And that's exactly where we tend to find more people who self-identify as lesbian, right? And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying if you're a dominating or emotionally chill woman that makes you a lesbian. Those are societal stereotypes that are implying or imposing that sort of thing. Same thing, if you happen to be maybe an unathletic male, but you're emotional, or you're very artsy, you're part of the chess club or the drama club or those sorts of things, and that's exactly where we tend to find a lot of male homosexuals in our society, stereotypically, is in the arts, in the theater, in drama, in music, in theology, in philosophy, in these kind of high-end sort of melancholy sort of venues, or the very outgoing, flamboyant, effeminate sort of things. Which it isn't effeminate per se, but our society has said those are feminine qualities. And we have crossed over these sorts of things. Any other questions, comments? All right. Well, this I think will help if we do get into like homosexual issues or transgender issues or things like that, which I hope we do have time for. And you'll at least be aware of this chart that we can use. And you don't even have to agree with this. I just think if you want to be able to have the conversation with other people in our culture, this is so helpful, and at least you know what you're talking about when you say stuff like identity, attraction, sex. You know, they've just left the whole gender piece out of this for whatever reason. I would say that identity, that's kind of the gender piece.